Welcome back, everyone, to 101 Questions at Church Planters Ask. I'm one of your hosts, Danny Parmalee.
And I'm Chrishigh.
And today we're going to be answering the question, what are some of the things that I should consider when looking for a place to meet, kind of that starting place of gathering. So, Chris, why don't you kind of kick us off, can share a little bit of your story.
Yeah, you can plant a church literally anywhere. You can plant a church in a school. You can plant a church in a movie theater, in a YMCA. Most churches start in a planter's living room, right, with a small group of people, and that's kind of how we started over 10 years ago. Whenever we first got our start, we met in our kids' elementary school, and then we moved from there. We quickly outgrew the school. It was kind of tough because there was a Sunday where we had like 150 people and the gym only fit like 125 at this elementary school. And I prayed on a Sunday night, God, give us either more volunteers so we can go to 2 services or give us a new space. And that Monday morning, the YMCA called me and said, hey, would you like to be in our facility? And the rent was around the same, and there were so many pros and positives to it. First of all, backing up for a second, elementary schools are sometimes a great place to start because they're a little smaller. But man, it's not great for parking because elementary kids, they obviously don't drive to school, right? And so and then also the toilets are smaller. Like everything about it is a little weird, and so you got to be careful about elementary schools. It's not the best option. But what is great often are middle schools or high schools or YMCAs or civic centers. And for us, we met at the YMCA for over 5 years.
Hey, Chris, let's go back. Chris, let's go back a little bit. I don't want to rush over the school one just because that I do think is probably the first option for many people, because you can just go directly there and find out what the costs are, what the different rooms are. But you had mentioned some important things about elementary school that I think is really important, and that would be parking, and then also just the space that you'd be able to utilize there. So most elementary schools, they don't have a auditorium because they're not doing plays like high schools or even sometimes middle schools. And sometimes middle schools do have an auditorium, but that's usually only because at one time it was a high school and got passed down or whatever when the city or the county built the new things. But let's just, with elementary schools, one of the big pros of it though is that it is a little bit smaller, and that's helpful even for like entry points and ease of use as far as like being able to get in there. Like, there's one door, there's one entry door. That's where you're going to go in, and you end up in there. Usually it's going to be like the cafeteria or the gym, the gymnasium type of thing. Now, there is a bit of a con to that though as well, in the sense that then you don't really have a stage, and it's like it's often flat, and then the lighting for it is also difficult, which that's what you need to think of when you visit these different places. Like if you shut those fluorescent lights off, then that means also you're going to have to add to it, and you're going to have to add all the sorts, your own lighting, and then oftentimes even to create a space, pipe and drape, and in those types of things. So
yeah, we had to bring a ton of gear into the elementary school to make it feel a little bit like an auditorium. So we had to build our own staging every single week, and sound and lighting and all of that. Whereas if you were like a middle school or a high school theater, oftentimes they have all of the seating that you're going to need, although that seating is not flexible. So there's pros and cons to any place you met. Now, the big pro for us with the elementary school is we had built-in relationship because all 3 of my kids went to this school. We were able to adopt the school, adopt all of the teachers. We were able to do a lot of different community service kinds of oriented things. We did movie nights in the park at the school, and so we were able to attract a ton of those families early on. And what's really interesting about families that are younger like that, sometimes it's easier to attract those families because they don't have all of the established things down pat in their lives yet. You'll notice the older a family gets, the more established they get in relationships. So they already have a lot of their friends.
Routines.
They already have a lot of their routines and extracurriculars. So if you can reach families when their kids are in the lower part of elementary school or even pre-K, that is absolutely essential. That's oftentimes when they're looking for hope. That's oftentimes whenever they're in a challenging season in their marriage or in their relationship. And so, man, church can be a great answer. Obviously, Jesus is the answer to help them with that. But as we think about locations, though, we quickly outgrew the elementary school. It was just getting really crowded. And so I prayed, God, give us a new spot or help us to double the amount of volunteers. And then that very next day, the YMCA called me and said, hey, would you be interested in moving into the YMCA? And it was an awesome opportunity. There was a church leaving the Y. I had coffee one time with the church planter that was in the YMCA, and he gave them our contact information. And I joined the YMCA as well, just because I wanted to get to know people at the Y in case we ever moved there. And sure enough,
you never worked out or anything. You just you were there basically just for a social thing. So
I paid $80 a month just social. No, I was working out occasionally. Anyway, so it's crazy though. So we move into the YMCA, and the church, there was way more exposure off the road. People knew where the YMCA was. You would tell people, hey, our church meets at John Weldon Elementary School. And unless your kids went to that school, you would have no idea where that place even was. You had to explain it. It was multiple turns off the road. What was amazing about the O'Fallon YMCA, where we were able to be portable for 5 years, was it was literally right off the main road. Everyone knew where it was. Even if you weren't a member at the YMCA, you knew where the O'Fallon YMCA was. And it was something that kind of put us on the map a little bit better. Again, it wasn't a permanent facility, but it was better than what we had in the past. And so it was a really great place for us. We were portable for 5 years. Now there's a lot of pros to the YMCA. Obviously, there's more parking, which is great because everyone's driving to the Y to go work out there or to watch their kids play volleyball or baseball or whatever. But the harsh reality is it doesn't smell great, right? You walk into a YMCA, and the joke I would make all the time to people that were on the inside of the church was, it kind of smells like a crime scene in here today, right? Because of the bleach and the chlorine with the pool. Now, what the other positive was, having a pool there meant we could just baptize people in the pool, and so that was kind of cool. But man, there were so many positives to YMCA. They actually closed. They were closed from. They didn't open on Sunday morning until 1 o'clock. And so we were able to do church in there. In fact, we grew to 2 services in the YMCA. We were considering going to 3. And then we got the permanent facility that we're in today, which has really been a game changer. But all that to say, you should become an expert on all the places that you could rent in your community, because you never know whenever you're going to get kicked out of that spot. It doesn't always take a worldwide pandemic to make that happen. Sometimes there's just new management that's not really interested in a church being there. Oftentimes one more downside to schools. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, let me jump in, and maybe this is where you were going to go with this, is it's different at each place. So even within schools, you might think, oh, I've got a total in. I'm friends with the principal. That could be the case. But in some school districts, the school itself doesn't even have a choice, and they have to, because it's part of their law that they have to rent it to you. Or it could be discretionary, and it's actually the principal's decision. So you've got to figure all of that out, and it may be different from school to school. And then same with the YMCA. So what was fascinating when we moved to Tennessee is that they literally had a position for someone at the YMCA to try to get churches to be in their facility. Like it was something that they wanted, where in other regions, it was like, do what you can to keep churches out. You know what I mean? And so you also have to be a little bit careful, even as we're sharing some different things. And we might say, elementary schools, they never have auditorium. So, you just are like, okay, well, I don't want to look at any elementary schools. No. It is your job. Figure all of these different things out. Everything that we're sharing, basically just put it in the back of your mind to start going through that checklist, and don't just pick the cheapest place, because
That's right.
it's not just about money. So one of the things that Chris mentioned is their move from the elementary school to the YMCA put them on the map more. Well, just think, if you're not on the map and it's this tucked away place, you might have to spend more money on marketing and awareness. So again, cheaper isn't always just the best option. The other thing that I'll just throw in there a little bit is that oftentimes church planners fall into the trap of thinking like, well, we're definitely going to be 250 people at some point, maybe within the first year or two. That's what everyone's kind of thinking. I know that's what I thought myself. So you're like, I don't want to go to a place that only fits 100 or 125. As a church planner, you are more than likely going to be in multiple places. So just think, what is going to get me from where I am now, launch team of 30 to 50 people, what do I need to get into that will get me to 125 or 150? So if you have a place that can fit 100, great. You can go to 2 services and, one of them will be, 75, the other one will be 50, whatever. Just think of it getting to the next phase, because sometimes actually too big, if you're like, oh, well, this is great, we've got this auditorium, it's got 500 seats, we'll just continue to grow into that. It actually often doesn't happen. You actually can have a place that is too big, and it actually is a negative in your momentum.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you got to think about it almost like you're growing up, right? When you grew up, you stayed in your parents' place for a bit, right? Maybe this is a bad metaphor. And then eventually you maybe moved into a dorm and then an apartment, and then you got a home, like it was like a smaller home, and then you get, as your family grows, you get a larger home. In the same way, when it comes to the life cycle of a church, man, initially you're not going to probably land in your forever home at your first location. And so keep that in mind, that this is for right now. And something I would tell our team all the time is we're never going to be smaller than we are right now. And so whether we were in my living room or the elementary school or the YMCA where we met, like, we're never going to be smaller than we are right now. And so vision is really important for you to keep out in front of people and say, hey, this is where we're meeting today. It doesn't mean this is where we're going to meet forever. And I would caution you on any kind of long-term lease anywhere. Try to spend 6 months to a year anywhere, like when it comes to lease agreements or signing things. Be really careful, because we've seen this happen to churches that met in storefronts, which, Danny, I think you're going to talk about that next as we talk about storefronts. Like, be really, really careful about contractual agreements that you sign with people. Talk about storefronts a little bit, Danny.
Yeah, so we never rented a storefront, so this isn't from personal experience. This is more of working with planters, and oftentimes when you have some sort of build out, you're looking at 3 years to 5 years minimum, and that can go really bad, both from if you don't grow into it and you can't afford the payments, but also what I've seen is church plants where they actually outgrow that facility, but they're kind of stuck with it because they had a 5-year lease, and oftentimes if there's some sort of build out that's like baked into the lease there, they literally they can't move, so it stunts their growth because they're stuck there for another year or two. Now there are some small things that you can do, looking at even if you have to get out of the lease, what's the total payment that you'd have to pay. So even just looking ahead of those types of things, like, hey, worst case scenario, we got to pay $35,000 to break the lease or something like that, and a 3 to 5 month notice or something that still gives you that option, that if all of a sudden you're just growing like crazy, that you do have an option to be able to get out of it. Now, the biggest advantage, of course, of doing some sort of storefront is the 24/7. It's less about the setup and tear down. I know that a lot of church planners are like, oh, it would just be so much easier on our people if they didn't have to set up and tear down each week. That should never, ever, ever be your driving force. To be honest, there's an advantage, especially in the church planting phase, to have a set up and tear down team. You're giving people a purpose, and to be honest, a lot of the early people, they don't want to be a Sunday school teacher. They're non-believers, but they're like, I want to be part of this. Can I help with rolling out the sound the speakers and the chair, setting up the chairs, but don't put me in some sort of like, I don't know, spiritual leadership position.
They're not going to be, they're not going to be a small group leader. I mean, what's hard is our setup team, well, not hard, what was really great about our setup team was over half of the dudes on that team would have never led a small group. They would have never been a person that you would even put at the front door greeting people, but they would show up to church 3 hours before we started church, and they would sweat and they would work together. And some of those guys, like I said, they didn't even know Jesus yet, but it was those relationships that were built during setup and teardown that created the kind of community where they could take a next step and say yes to Jesus. And so, I would, as someone that was portable for 6 years, I would tell you, man, do not let the setup and teardown team be the reason why you rush into a storefront or something like that. In fact, we almost went to a storefront. Our church did, Grace River, and Danny visited the storefront with me. And I was ready to sign the lease agreement. Like this facility had already been built out as a church. Coincidentally, the church that met there had died. And Danny looked at me and said, "Do you wonder why the church died?" And I'm like, "No, I mean, this is a great," like he goes, "You're going to die here too." And I'm like, shoot, I don't want our church to die. And so like I took the advice from a friend and a mentor, like Danny.
Did I really say that, Chris, or are you just trying to make me look good on the podcast here?
No, so. I mean it. Like you actually said you could die here.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, dude, I don't want our church to die. We're growing, right? And so like it was a patient game though, because the reality is this was on my C group. Like I had like A group, like places we really wanted to be someday, B group, like so-and-so, and then there was like C group, which is like the girl that you really didn't want to ask to prom, but you're like, eh. And the thing was like she was looking better and better in the C group, like I wasn't just like, I'm not sure. And that's why I had Danny come visit me, and Danny reminded me, no, this is a really bad facility. Like do not get into this lease agreement. And dude, today I am sitting in what I would say is an A. We're right off the interstate, and what it required was patience. And the opportunity will come. Danny and I have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what makes a church plant work. And it's a lot of different things. Obviously, it's a move of God, right? But oftentimes, it's the right opportunities, like using wisdom and saying, okay, we are going to seize this opportunity. And I would say, most of the time, I would be very cautious about a long-term agreement in a storefront because you'll notice something about storefront churches. If you observe anything in your communities, they typically don't grow. Now, I'm not saying that they're not going to grow. I'm just saying typically they kind of level out or plateau around 80 to 100 people. That's just been my experience living in this community for 10 years and watching different church plants come in and out of storefront facilities.
Yeah. The other thing, the reason that I hear church planners that try to convince me that storefront is the way to go is, well, then we can be there 24/7. To which I'm usually like, that's not always a pro. You actually create issues because then all of a sudden you're at the church and other people are at the church instead of being out in the community doing different things. Then you have people that want to start renting your facility, using your facility. You've got people that just, I need something, so I'm just going to go to the church and knock on the door and ask if they'll pay my rent or groceries or whatever. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have some sort of ministry like that, but there's a lot of negatives that come to renting kind of that long-term facility. But I would just say, just even as a general thing, that flexibility in the beginning, you're getting to know your community, places. You don't know how God can kind of shift things around and change things. So to have a little bit of that freedom in the beginning is really, really nice to have. It might even mean going to the other side of town and that type of thing. So,
I think the big mantra that we had too, Danny, was like, the church is not a building that you drive to. It's a movement that you choose to be a part of. And so because before planters plant churches, typically they've been in a traditional church setting, and you think in your mind, oh man, we have to have offices and we have to have this and that and a 24/7 operation. You don't have to have that. In fact, you could even, if you just insist on having offices and want a 24/7 setup, rent out 1,000 square foot office space somewhere where you can meet with people, have band practice, whatever. That's what we did for 3 years. And it was really great because it gave us that quote unquote permanent home. but it was really difficult as well. And so,
yep, I was just counting on my hand. I was 5 years without any office at all because we were renting a facility, and it yes, there's some downsides to that, but the overall advantages is just being out and about and being in the community. So let's talk a little bit about movie theaters. For a while, definitely in the 90s, that was like the place to kind of do a church plant. I'm seeing it a lot less now. I'll start out with one of the pros, and that is, of course, parking. Almost every movie theater is set up so that it can park lots of people. Second of all, you have your permanent seating. So even though you're renting, you're not setting up chairs. But as we said, that's not that big of a thing. The other thing is that there are movie theater companies where they do want to rent out. Even Marcus, you can type in Marcus Theaters church planting, and they have a whole department that is set up so that they can rent their facilities out, because a lot of people aren't going to the movies on Sunday morning, so they literally want to utilize their space to be able to do it, so it can be there. One of the biggest negatives, of course, is children's area, and so you've got to be thinking about that. I've seen it done, and I've seen it done well in theaters, that you basically rent out, if it's, there's 4 to 5 different actual theaters there. You can rent out one of them, and that becomes like the kids area. But I don't know, it's kind of weird because you're either on the stage or in the front, you're on a tilt. I don't know, just a little bit odd.
Yeah.
So
you don't see this in movie theaters because you rarely walk in there when the lights are fully on. But movie theaters are really gross. Like the carpet usually isn't that clean. There's stale popcorn and spilled soda, and it's sticky. Like, there are a lot of things about movie theaters that aren't clean. In fact, if you do the research, a lot of movie theaters actually have rat problems, because we actually looked at movie theaters for a while, and it's a great option. But man, sometimes there's, especially in an older theater, they're not as well maintained as they need to be, and you may even have to bring in like a special crew that cleans the bathrooms for you before or afterwards. In fact, I would tell you, in any portable situation, that may need to be a part of a team that you could set up, like some kind of a hospitality team, making sure they're beautifying whatever campus that you're using. We had to do that because the elementary school is kind of stinky sometimes. But all that to say, movie theaters are a great option. Just something to think about with the pros and cons. Parking is always great at movie theaters, which is nice, unless it's some kind of a downtown movie theater or something. And then usually the rate is pretty reasonable because, as Danny mentioned, there's not a lot happening on Sunday mornings for movie theaters, but the first showing usually is at noon. And so that would mean that you would have to, you can't linger a long time at a movie theater because, hey, they're getting ready to start and we got to go. So,
and you also can't do a lot of outdoor stuff, which that beginning, I mean, I guess it depends on the movie theater, but you're not able to kind of like set up a tent or set up a bounce house and do all of that stuff. That's kind of the eye-catching thing. So all right, last one I think that we did not cover yet is using another church as a facility, a church that's going. This, of course, was our personal experience. Lots of pros to it, lots of difficulties as well. And I think I'm going to start with one of the difficulties, of course, is just confusion. So you go renting another church, people can make that association. So let's say whatever, you're charismatic and you're renting out, First Baptist Church, and all of a sudden people just assume whatever, trappings, whatever that group or denomination or theology has that's different than yours. And to be able to parse out some of those different things can be pretty difficult. But I would say the number one difficulty is actually just working with that other church. And it can start out really, really well because you're both kind of, pie in the sky, rose-colored glasses, and you do your service and we'll do ours later in the afternoon, or we'll do ours earlier in the morning, you do yours later. But I am telling you, the number of stories where it just becomes difficult because someone moved the water bottle from the stage over to here, or someone moved the podium, or someone did this, or you're not out quick enough, you're not out in time. And so there are a lot of difficulties with that.
Yeah, I think for this option, it's my least favorite of all that we've talked about. Now, sometimes there's just no other option, right? And so you just have to roll with it. I'm working with a church planter right now that's doing this, and it's working really well. But they even had conflict over a paint color that everybody had decided on, and then the new church decides to paint the lobby, and it's not the right color. Or that it was too dark in the established church's opinion. And it was like, oh man, this is just a lot. It's really difficult to please those folks. Even when the church that you're meeting in is kind of dying, they're still holding on, and their building is kind of like the Alamo. And it's like, you don't want to mess with this. And so as a result of that.
Yeah. That was our experience, and even including when we would want to change something, because they had the old like flannel banners, not for the kids, but literally like hanging up, and it's like, hey, is there any way that we can, like take them down, put them back up? It just, and like you said, for them it was sacred space. It had it's tied to so many different things. But again, I would say there are lots of examples though where it becomes a good thing. And so even in our situation, one of the pros is that as this church did end up closing its doors, we ended up buying the building. We had a foot in the door to be able to do that. We knew the facility, we knew the things that were wrong with it. We knew the advantages that it had. And that does happen. And there's also times, even the church plant that we helped with here in Tennessee, the church building was actually gifted to the church plant. And so when you get scenarios like that, that's absolutely huge, where you start out as a renter, and then all of a sudden that building gets gifted to you because that church is happy, and they were excited to see the growth and the young people and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So
I think you just have to gauge, is this church looking at their building like a monument or a potential of a movement? And that's the big thing, right? The church is never designed to be a monument. But you can find out really quickly when you start to interview that church what is sacred to them. And they'll say initially not much, right? But then, oh, you can't move this, you can't do that, watch out for this, somebody donated that, there's no way. Like, it's like, hey, you want to make sure if you end up in a partnership like this that they're really open-handed with their facility. Yeah. I'm not saying they're going to give everything away. There's not an ideal situation out there. So whether you're in a school, a movie theater, a community center, like, one of the things we had to deal with at the YMCA that I forgot to mention was there was a book fair 5 times a year. I mean, 5 times a year we had to figure out a way to make the lobby not look like a circus. Like, it was crazy. Yeah. But all that to say, no matter where you're at, it's going to be a challenge. But man, with all those challenges, there's opportunities to develop more teams and use wisdom and make sure that you're not moving too fast. Get the insight from a friend that's been there and done that. Don't seek advice just from people in your church, because most of them had never planted a church before. Get another church planter, whether it's in your town or in your region that's a part of your movement, and get their eyes on it as well. I'm telling you, I think our church wouldn't be alive today if we would have made some of the bad decisions I initially wanted to make because I just wasn't patient when it came to a facility.
Chris, one of the things that's really important when you're renting facilities, whether it's theater or school, definitely you need good signage, because people already might be confused, like, oh, so wait, is this a church, is it a school, is it YMCA, whatever. And so one of the great things is even we have our sponsors, outreach.com, who give all of our listeners like $1,500 worth of signage and marketing stuff. And so you have no excuse. You can get that. And of course, if you need to add to it, which I'm sure you will, and you'll kind of build over time to be able to do that. So small little shout out to outreach.com for that. What you can do if you want that free stuff that they're giving to our listeners, just go to churchplanters.com/free stuff. You're not entering a drawing to maybe get it. You literally get it. Just go there, fill out the form, and they'll give you the free stuff, and it's branded, all of your signage and things like that. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Make sure you take advantage of that. Well, I think that we can wrap it up right there. Hopefully this helped you as you're trying to decide and discern where your church plant could meet. And if you have a question for us, you can go to churchplantersask.com, type it in there. And until next time, keep asking those questions.